Welcome to the Low Carb USA podcast, where we seek to inspire you to help us build this community. I'm Doug Reynolds.
And this is Pam Devine.
I talk with Dr. Robert Cywes today about the ketogenic diet and veganism and whether or not it's doable to start with. And if it is doable, is it sustainable and healthy? It was supposed to be about veganism and vegetarianism, but it went a bit long. So I've divided it into two parts. This first part is specifically on veganism. And then part two next week will be about vegetarianism and how that differs and whether or not that is sustainable or not. And then what I've left at the end of that one is a conversation, like an outtake almost, of our conversation once the podcast sort of ended. We had actually quite an interesting conversation. And so I've kind of left it in at the end of part two. Hope you guys enjoy it.
I think before we go into the benefits, the pros, the cons, everything else, I'm just going to highlight, not comprehensively, but a few very important evolutionary characteristics of the human gastrointestinal tract and how the human intestine has evolved. We likely evolved from a vegetarian predecessor or a precursor in our evolutionary channel. But as human beings evolved, as our brains developed, and as we developed more of a shoreline lifestyle, in other words, our ancestors typically evolved around shorelines where they had access to seafood, they had access to plants and animals that roamed on the edge of the water, and they had easy access to water and salt. So as our intestine evolved, as we evolved as Homo Sapiens, we started to move a little bit away from a pure vegetarian diet, and we started adopting more of an ability to eat animals. And what does that mean from an intestinal perspective? Well, progressively, we lost the ability to live symbiotically. In other words, live in a relationship with bacteria. All mammals that are vegetarian primarily use bacteria to process cellulose, to break down the energy-containing parts of vegetables. We don't have the enzymes in our own intestine to do that effectively. So we have to have this relationship, this symbiotic relationship with them. And as we developed the modern human intestinal tract, we lost the ability to have that relationship with bacteria. And I know there's a lot of talk about the human biome and the relationship we have with bacteria and that kind of thing, but really for humans, as opposed to cows and certainly gorillas, the necessity of those bacteria has gone down dramatically because we don't need them to extract sugar from our food and convert it to fatty acids. That's the way cows and gorillas work. So our intestine has lost its ability to extract nutrition or really energy from plants. So that's the first important thing. However, what we've also done is developed a whole series, a whole subset of enzymes that break down amino acids, fat, and complex sugars. And it is done in an enzymatic process, starting in the mouth with saliva, in the stomach, in the intestine. But when food enters the colon, there is no absorption of food other than water or salt, or secretion of water or salt. So the colon is really part of waste manufacture. It isn't part of nutritional absorption like it is in a gorilla. So human beings have evolved their small intestine to be the primary source of our nutritional processing and our nutritional absorption. And it is primarily done through enzymes rather than in a relationship with bacteria. And the enzymes primarily favor the processing of animal products. And that is just human biology. It's inarguable human biology. Do we have the ability to extract some minerals and some components of plants? Absolutely. Particularly, interestingly enough, some of the grains where we are able to process them to sugar, and we're able to extract that sugar, and it gave us a survival advantage. The other key thing that human beings do is our minerals and our vitamins and our trace elements should be absorbed with our food. It should be absorbed with our food. Nutrition is a team sport. So for example, vitamins A, D, E, K, the so-called fat-soluble vitamins, are critical to human survival. but they require fat to be absorbed. So if you consume them without fat, you're really not going to absorb them properly. And in fact, the human body is just amazing the way it works. So we excrete bile from the liver, which is very, very high in cholesterol. And that cholesterol is packed in a little micelle, or a little soap bubble. And it's into that soap bubble that we absorb large fatty acids and the vitamins A, D, E, K. And that gets absorbed in the intestine, particularly the lower small intestine, and then gets dumped into the bloodstream directly in the neck. It doesn't go through the liver, and goes directly to the fat cells and through the systemic circulation to the liver. And that's called the enterohepatic cycling of bile, where you get this cholesterol absorbing fat, absorbing the vitamins, dumping them into the body, and then getting re-excreted into the bile. It's a cyclical system. So there are certain aspects of human biology that necessitate the way we eat in order to be healthy. And it really is disadvantageous to eating plants and very advantageous to eating animal products. The final piece I'll say about the chemical side, or the processing side, is that you get a much bigger bang for your buck from energy-dense, energy-rich, and nutrient-rich animal products. Why is that important? So if you're eating vegetables, you need to eat a massive amount over a long period of time to get adequate nutrition. When you're eating animal products, you need a very small amount because of the nutrition density that you can consume in a very short period of time and go for a very long period of time with that food. Why is that important? That's important because it frees us humans up to do other things. It frees us up to use our brains. If we're grazing and pooping all the time because of the low energy density of vegetables and we're not able to extract it, that's pretty much all we're doing. We're grazing, we're eating, we're defending, and we're not doing much with our brains. As we shorten our time that it's required to forage for food, to look for food, to eat food, and as we learn to store food, we reduce the amount of time we spend eating, or we should be, because now in modern America, we're increasing the amount of time we spend eating and drinking. But be that as it may, that allows us to develop as humans, as the apex predators that we are. The final thing that I'm going to throw in here from a non-intestinal biologic perspective, and you've heard me on other podcasts, and I refer you to my other podcasts, is that there's one element of food that we absorb very readily because of the survival advantage, and that is sugar and starch, carbohydrates. Our intestine is very, very accustomed and adapted to absorb those very rapidly. But the reason we have that is because there is a huge survival advantage to small amounts of carbohydrates, because they weren't available in abundance, and they gave us that little bit of an advantage. The problem is that in order to get people to really seek out carbohydrates when we were hunter-gatherers, the human body evolved to give us a high, to give us a buzz, to give us this powerful endorphin effect from eating carbohydrates so that we preferentially eat them. Just like an orgasm in sexual experience, which makes reproduction such an important part of our existence and makes us favorable to reproduce. In the same way, carbohydrates make it favorable to chase them in nature. And when they're scarce, they don't cause harm. The problem is that we've been so good as humans, we've created carbohydrates in abundance, primarily in our grains and our breads, but now also in manufactured simple sugars. So while carbohydrates occur in what I call quasi-nature, in other words, human adapted nature or GMO nature, which is really all the grains that we eat, whether it's wheat, whether it's quinoa, whether it's barley, oatmeal, oats, doesn't much matter. Humans have, in a Mendelian way, in a genetic way, transformed those foods to be very much more energy dense and pest resistant. So we've evolved that type of food, and it is readily absorbed and it gives us a huge high, so it becomes very easy with availability to eat those in abundance. Okay, so having said that, having discussed that briefly in very simplistic terms about how the intestine works and how the human body works, let's look at exactly what the human body needs. Ultimately, what has made human beings successful is our ability to be omnivorous, to live on a wide range of food in a wide, diverse habitat, from the Arctic to the equator and all the way around. So because we can go anywhere from pure plant-based or almost pure plant-based to almost pure carnivorous, let's examine some of the leans one way or the other. And when I say the lean one way is, let's look at the vegan diet, which is pretty much a lean toward the plant-based diet. And essentially, what veganism means is not consuming anything from animal origin. That includes honey to meat. So you exclude anything that comes from animals, and you can eat any form of plants. Now, the plants are typically divided into two sections. In my mind, when I look at it nutritionally, the grains or the high carbohydrate, starchy types of foods, and then the leafy vegetable types of foods. And then in the middle, you've got fruit, which typically lean toward the carbohydrate side. The majority of the naturally occurring carbohydrates typically do have some nutritional value, but they are relatively deficient in amino acids, and they're quite deficient in essential fatty acids. So when it comes to a vegan diet, you can survive on a vegan diet if a high percentage of your diet is grain-based or carbohydrate-based. In other words, if you're eating a lot of fruit and a lot of starchy vegetables and grains. The problem with that is that our abundant consumption of carbohydrates activates in certain people the addictive nature of that relationship. So they migrate toward eating a very, very high amount of carbohydrate within that vegan diet. And that lends itself to diseases such as obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. So the move away from those diseases requires, and you can look at my previous podcast on this, requires what we call a ketogenic diet, where you reduce your dependence on sugar and you increase your dependence on stored fat and on fat that we eat, and use ketone bodies rather than glucose, or together with glucose in your bloodstream, as your primary energy source. When you do that, there are two issues with a pure vegan diet. The first one is that excluding all sources of significant absorbable carbohydrates, which are your starches, your grains, and your fruit, it leaves a huge deficiency of an adequate spectrum of nutrients. Yes, there are carbohydrates in plants, but because the human body can't extract them, in our plan, we don't measure them at all, because you poop them out. They're not part of what we do. The other very important thing to understand is that while vegetables are a source of fiber, it is a misconception that fiber is necessary for normal human intestinal function. Fiber is unnecessary for normal human intestinal function. So if you try to design a ketogenic vegan diet, Doug, I've tried, man. I've tried so hard, and I can't. I cannot design a ketogenic vegan diet that offers every portion of macro and micronutrient that I need in adequate volumes, and that is sustainable. In order to be on a quasi-sustainable vegan diet, you have to be eating continuously, and you have to be foraging and eating these low-dense foods continuously if you're going to exclude the high carbohydrate fruits and carbohydrates, and it's just not possible. So then, in order to get in the nutrients, whether they're the macros, the amino acids, or the essential fats, or the micronutrients, the minerals, the vitamins, and the trace elements, now you have to move away from diet, which is what I call the food products that we eat, and you now have to enter the realm, this shady, dark box of what we call supplementation. Well, by definition for me, Doug, a diet that requires supplementation in pill and supplement and additive form is not a diet. If I cannot harvest, either from the ground or from plants or from trees or from other animals, my food, I don't call that food. When you have to go to GNC or a vitamin shop to buy food, that is a deficient diet. So the way I look at it, both from a sustainability and an essential nutrient perspective, veganism is a diet of malnutrition. And that's not me being emotive, that is me being biological. Could you sustain yourself for a short period of time? Absolutely. But in the long term, if you are going to sustain yourself as a human being, The vegan diet is unsustainable without supplementation.
Okay, but with supplementation, is it possible? Because that I was asking you earlier, I wasn't really sure of the answer there.
Yeah, it is possible, but we really don't know long term. And I'm talking 2+ years out. There are people that have done this, but they supplement tremendously. And even then they have deficiencies primarily of amino acids. So supplementation can get you by for a while. But remember what I said when I was talking about biology, Doug? Nutrition's a team sport. And when you put fish oil in a capsule, you put vitamin D in a tablet, and you consume them, you may be putting those nutrients in your mouth. But are they actually being absorbed? Probably not. And they certainly aren't being absorbed in the quantities that you need, because nutrition is a team sport. It needs the other players. I mean, can you imagine putting Tom Brady, without argument, the single best quarterback that ever lived, on a field against a high school defensive team by himself? He's totally useless. So you got the greatest quarterback that ever lived. Without his team, he's useless. And that's exactly where vitamins and supplements happen to be. If you're not consuming them with the foods that are required to absorb them, and in particular it's fat, you may be putting them in your mouth, but you're fooling yourself that they're entering your body. And that's the problem. So I understand the evangelical nature of the vegan diet, but it's just an inadequate diet if you want to try a keto vegan diet. If you're okay getting diabetes and gaining a lot of subcutaneous tissue and gaining fat and losing muscle, then the vegan diet is okay when it comes to eating grains and fruits. Or if you don't have the addictive concerns that we have with the sugar and the starch. But that's the problem with the diet. Human beings are not designed to consume huge amounts of carbohydrates on a regular basis. We become insulin resistant, and bad things happen when we become insulin resistant. So as I researched this, as I looked at this, and I've been doing this for 20 years, Doug, I've just not been able to find a way, with all due respect, I've not been able to find a sustainable way in which the vegan diet is healthy, even with some supplementation. It is okay for a short period of time. And if you do it for a short period of time, the cool thing is you will lose a huge amount of weight. Why are you losing weight? Because it's a diet deficient in calories. But that's okay, because your body's got good stores for a few months. So if you want to try it to drop some weight, that's absolutely fine. If you want to try it for a little while to get your diabetes under some form of control, you don't get rid of the diabetes, but you manage it a little bit better, okay. But don't do it long term, because it is a diet of deficiency. And Doug, which organ in the human body is most affected and least easy to measure if the effect of damage? What organ in the human body is most harmed by the vegan diet? And it's the organ in the human body that we have the least capacity to measure harm until it's so obvious that a 5-year-old child can see it. And that is the human brain.
Right.
Dementia, brain issues, including autism spectrum disorders, are very, very common in people who do not eat adequate saturated fat. And even if you can get some saturated fat in on the vegan diet, your ratio of 3 omega fatty acids to 6 omega fatty acids is in the realm of 1:20 or 1:40. It's not in the realm of 1:3, 1:6 that we really need as an intake in the human body. And those are essential fatty acids. We have to consume them. So both in our pregnant mothers, in our young children, in our growing children, and through adulthood, the brain starts to decay because it doesn't have adequate fat as those cells turn over. And therein lies the deficiency. You can rape your muscles, oh, that's a horrible word, but you can rape your own muscles to supply the protein that you need. But at some stage, even your muscles can't supply you with more. So when you go on the vegan diet for a long period of time, you start cannibalizing your own body for nutrients. You're turning over your own body. That's not the way nutrition is supposed to work. Nutrition is supposed to give you what you need in your face and then process that and transform that to all the elements that you need, the non-essential elements. The vegan diet does not give you adequate essential nutrients, in my opinion. And I'm willing to take the stage and argue with anybody that's willing to argue with me on the biology of this. I'm not going to discuss the emotive part, the evangelical part, the religious part. I'm a scientist, I'm a doctor, and I'm willing to go toe-to-toe with anybody when it comes to human biology. But I'm going to exclude the religious natures, the climate changes, all the evangelical people that really are believers rather than coming at us with facts. But when it comes to biologic fact, the vegan diet is not an option, in my opinion, when it is ketogenic.
You've been listening to an episode of the Low Carb USA podcast. Please consider helping to make this work that we do sustainable by visiting us at patreon.com/lowcarbusa to see if there's a way that you can contribute to our efforts.